Good. So, how are we all doing? Good, good. I was expecting a massive room full of thousands of people. So y'all are going to have to participate. We'll get started right away and others walk in. Great. This is going to be a lot of information, short amount of time, but I promise you it's all really good information. This is a very stepping forward talk. It's not a compliance talk. It's not your typical kind of risk story. Oh, and I should say this too, and I'll say it now that you're walking in the room in the back too. Originally, the person that was going to present to y'all had a title called The Death of the Ciso or something along those lines to be catchy. And I've worked with that guy 20 years, and he could pull that off because I'm sure he has a twist to it, and there's a good story in the end. I don't know what that theme was, and I'm not going to try to fake that one out. So this is a different talk. But it literally covers 99% of what's in that same description, just with a different title and a little bit of a different twist, okay? The twist I want you guys to remember today is we're going to talk about the cybersecurity problem in the broadest sense of the term, but couched against a single concept called time. We all know what time is, but we're going to think a little bit more critically about time and how that affects things like the cyber kill chain, how it affects these massive events like WannaCry and NotPetya coming through, and why time is the single greatest asset and enemy in this battle we call cybersecurity. So with that, I'll begin. And I might get a little interactive here because we have a smaller group and that might be fun, so don't fall asleep. So being ahead of patient zero. So who knows what a patient zero is? Everybody knows what patient zero is, right, in general, right? We often think of patient zero as a single patient zero. It's not singular. Okay, what we learned when these big worms come through or APT campaigns out there, there's thousands or tens of thousands of patient zeros that happen at the same time. So the question becomes, how do we get literally ahead of patient zero from a time advantage perspective, okay? And this is going to get interesting because at Cylance, we're a predictive AI company. This is not a pitch deck, but this is a deck that's designed to articulate the value that a predictive AI brings to the cybersecurity problem. And it applies to much more than just malware, which we're known for, but it applies to many other things as well, and I'll speak to those. So here we go. That's my little daughter, otherwise known as my little war fighter. I call her that because I love her. And I spent 17 years supporting the DoD. My background is supporting satellites and submarines and massive programs of record at a 900,000-seat enterprise and assessing 2,200 systems a year. And protecting the warfighter from the Chinese and Russians primarily, but also the Iranians. And I'll tell you a short story about the Iranians in a little bit. But I switched gears about 4 years ago, and I left that space over to what we call the vendor space, where I am now. I was at FireEye Mandiant 2 years prior to Cylance. Been here 2 years. That's who I am. Okay, so let's warm our brains up really quick and just normalize and think about predictive AI, just so we're in the right mindset of what we mean by a predictive AI. Before you look at this slide, does anybody own a Tesla or know somebody that does? I don't either. I wish I did, because I'd love a ride. But Teslas were known, obviously, early on for autonomous driving, and even before that for autonomous braking, right? The ability to put on the brakes better than you can as a human before there's an impending impact. And how does it do that? It leverages the predictive AI in a small fraction of a second to say, because of these 6 sensors coming into my model, I believe that I'm about ready to crash. I better put on the brakes even if the human driver who's fully paying attention doesn't see it happening yet, okay? So in this casual example, we see that a predictive AI is better than the human race, if you will, at putting on the brakes prior to impact. That is already a humbling proposition for most of us in the room, especially any of us that like to drive cars fast. I race cars on the weekends. That's for me, I hate the fact that the AI is better than I am. But let's kick it up a notch. Okay, I have a DoD background. I'll go through these fairly quickly. I don't have time to spend a lot of time on these slides, but Alpha is a predictive AI. So this guy, Colonel Gene Lee, is the best dogfighter in the world. He's always beaten every single AI dogfighter adversary ever, and he's never lost, and he helps articulate and design these programs. Well, for the first time in 2016, he lost. He lost bad. So we crossed this threshold where the AI is infinitely better than any human pilot will ever be. He was shot out of the sky continuously. It knew the shot he was going to take before he made it. He never got a single shot off before he was already dead. Okay? He's never beaten this AI since it came into existence. This AI runs, it's a fuzzy AI, fuzzy logic AI. It runs on a $500 laptop equivalent of hardware. So that's how advanced AI has become in the last few years. Okay? So I'm trying to get us in the mind of the fact that this AI predicts what the pilot is about to do and takes an action before the human is able to succeed. Another one, anybody who does anything with signals intelligence or has any background, this aircraft scares you if you're the enemy. You see the E-18 Growler coming at you, you should be scared in the theater of war, because what this thing does is flies around the airspace, ingests radio frequency of the enemy, literally uses an algorithm running in RAM, and proactively predicts the channels they're going to hop to and jams those channels before the enemy can switch to it. So the enemy is flying blind or radio silent. They're literally jammed eternally as long as that thing is in the sky. Okay? In years past, the same platform, the Growler platform, goes back a long time ago when they used to take hard drives over to Fort Meade, do some analysis, load it back up, and proactively try to jam frequencies they think the enemies will be flying in the airspace. Now it's running in RAM. Okay? So I'm going to start to accelerate the same theme and end it on a fun note to normalize it. How many people watch Netflix? I watch it with my spouse. It's really weird because she likes horror films, and I don't. But if you look at my feed, it's nothing but horror films. But anyway, so Netflix, this will humble us again. Netflix knows what you're going to want to watch as a human being, right? Everybody in the room, better than you do 3 years from now. It's going to want to know the movie you want to watch, the category, the actors, the pace of the movie, the cinematography, the director, everything else about the movie. That AI is already. Do you remember when you first started watching Netflix? You had a 5-star rating system. Now they switched to just a thumb up and thumb down. Why? Because the AI has already progressed to a point where it's self-tuning. It's forever going to know better than a human what a human's going to watch from here on out and get progressively better at that task. Predictive AIs are scary and weird. Okay, this is what we need to understand. So now we're going to bring it back to cyber. Okay, bring it back down to cyber. 5 facts to set the stage for you that I'll run through really quick. And you've heard a lot of these, but these, if you hear the numbers and we kind of tune out, oh, he's going to do numbers, everything costs hundreds of millions of dollars, I'm over it. Don't, okay? Focus on these slides just for a moment. Cyber crimes are going to double, all right? The costs, okay, associated with that. But more importantly, like the ransomware fight that we're having is going to go up 15% already since 2015. It'll literally increase 4x by 2020. 4x from where it is now, the ransomware problem, okay? If we think about us in this room, there's probably 15 of us in the room or whatever it is. The human attack surface where we're most vulnerable as cyber people is going to actually go up itself 60%. There's going to be 6 billion people in the world by 2022. That's crazy, right? The unfilled cyber jobs is probably the most important bolus on the slide, and probably resonates mostly with this audience than anything else, especially anything to do with .gov at all. Retaining security analysts, people are the hardest thing you can do. That problem is literally going to triple to 3.5 million people by 2021. So in the next 3 years, it's going to go from 1 million to 3.5 million. That's a big problem we have, okay? And the spending itself is going to go up 10x. So you're going to spend a lot more money on technology. You're going to have a lot few people that know how to leverage that technology. The problem we already have in the last 3 years, we bought all the things, all the shiny toys in our stack. We still don't have the people, they're not operationalized, you're not getting ROI, etc., right? That problem itself is going to go up 10x, right? So that sets the stage. This is a slide that represents where we need to go as an industry, right? This is a very strong opinion slide. This is my opinion, okay? And I left from FireEye Mandiant and the intelligence community, working with FBI, working with fusion centers, working with DoD intelligence, etc. And I left off in my career before Cylance right about here. And saying it's a matter of if not when. It's kind of stopping there and saying it's a matter of understanding what's in your environment by ingesting third-party intelligence and going to hunt for it to know I'm already hacked, right? I'm gonna kick this up a notch, or I'm gonna push this forward for us. We need to try to get here, which means literally ahead of all threats. Meaning we're temporarily, literally time-wise, we're ahead of bang. We are truly left of bang. How do we get there? Okay, that's what this whole slide's about. This slide I did on the plane, and it's because I had a conversation with our Ciso, Malcolm Harkins, prior to coming here. Malcolm is one of my mentors. He was the former Ciso at Intel Corporation, and the CFO before that. He's now our Chief Trust Officer at Cylance. He's one of the best speakers you could ever attend at RSA if you ever get a chance. He's a leadership speaker. He's amazing. But I always go to him when I have an idea and I don't know how to get into a concept. And so here's the same concept where you have time on one axis as you normally do, going left to right, and then that says threat sophistication. Can you guys read that in the back of the room? Okay. And I apologize if I have a black background problem. So threat sophistication. So here we are. This is 99% of what we hear, do, see in the security industry. It's a linear approach to information security. It's the business and economics of security. It's patching, it's inventory management, It's all the vulnerability management we do. It's incident response. It's detect and respond. It's intelligence. It's all the things. But the problem is this has been progressing fairly linearly, whereas the threat sophistication in red, if you can see that curve, has gone exponential. It's gone exponential for a number of really, really important good reasons. First of all, computing power itself has gone through the roof. That has enabled attackers to automate. It's enabled them to use machine learning and AI against us. It's enabled them to automate portions of that cyber kill chain to a point of where they're progressing at the speed of computing itself. Okay? So the computing power itself has done that, right? Obviously, we know about their stealth, their persistence, the automation, and the fact that this problem is also scaled. Not WannaCry, not Petya, are classic examples of, oh my God, this is huge. Spectre vulnerability, which we'll talk about. Literally every computer you or your family member have used since 1995, every single keyboard you've ever touched has been vulnerable to this vulnerability for 25 plus years. So when that worm hits, if it ever gets weaponized, as we say, we have big things to look out for. So why is this an interesting slide? Well, it should get interesting right about here. This growing gap is really the risk curve that we've managed to. This is the fact that if you think about a storm like, a rainstorm like we went through with Houston with, help me out, Houston. What? Katrina was a big one. Harvey is the one I'm thinking of. I just lived through that. I can't remember the name of it. Irma hit Florida at the same time. But these are massive storms that hit, and they were blew out all the models. All the engineers were like, we could not design enough ability to hold rain water for this. Well, we're seeing the same thing in cyber. What we're seeing is that this gap itself of risk and impact is going through the roof. And that same slide I had earlier, if you build up kind of where most people are, trying to be dynamic and maybe do some automation, trying to be resilient to nation-state attacks, again, if not when kind of statements, and I want to be able to detect and respond. Well, what we've been able to do in the last years, and I'll build it out one more time around 2015, is actually this influx right here, where green crosses ahead of red, is the first time in the entire cybersecurity industry, in 30 plus years we've been doing this, all of us, that the good guys actually have time itself to their advantage. Now we're going to explore what we mean by the word time in this context, okay? That's what this whole presentation is actually all about, is getting us to understand, believe in, have confidence in, and actually hope more than anything else that time is on our side finally, okay? So to do that, we'll use the Lockheed Martin kill chain for a moment. Everybody know what that is? Have heard of that? Okay, if not, that's fine. The short version is it's the steps the attackers take, moving left to right, to compromise an organization. It's the things they do in the darknet. It's when they send you the spearfish, you click on the link, etc. Does that make sense? Okay. So what we found is that in every single kill chain out there, there's an ubiquitous choke point called execution there, the kind of glowing red, if you can't read that. And that is when the malware detonates, or you've actually clicked on it, and the malware executes and runs in your system. From that moment forward, you are what's called owned. You are no longer in control of your security stack, okay? And everything that happens after that, what we call the back half of the kill chain, after that moment, is happening at the speed of computing, like I said earlier. The callbacks, all your lateral movement, the moving left to right, using things like PowerShell, living off the land, the way they exfil data itself is being automated and subversive. And then on the darknet side, I kind of added this step to the kill chain to say, yes, your stuff is all for sale in a free market in open bids, right? So if you look at something like Spectre, does anybody know what Spectre is? Or hear about it in the news about 2 weeks ago? Yeah, okay, so Spectre is the hardware vulnerability that I was just speaking to that Intel just came out with, okay? It's in all of our computers. It's really bad. And the point is, in this slide, and I'll sum this slide up quickly, is that it doesn't matter what the vulnerability is of the day. There will always be vulnerabilities, okay? WannaCry, this big worm that we've heard about this morning in all the presentations, was a worm powered by NSA-grade tools. And that worm is exploiting a vulnerability that's been there for a number of years, okay? Those vulnerabilities and the exploits to exploit them will always be there. But what is always going to take place is this portion of the kill chain. You're always going to need a payload in a campaign, because as a bad guy, you don't care about exploiting vulnerable services. You care about doing something bad to the organization and good for yourself, okay? It's a criminal mindset we're dealing with these days more than anything else, okay? Or it's a nation state, or it's intellectual property that the bad guys are stealing. But whatever it is, it requires a payload. That payload is what Cylance, is, for example, has tried to actually predict and prevent from ever executing. So that red dot never goes off, okay? Kind of what I was just speaking of, there's really kind of 3 attacks out there right now that really harm our organizations that we're here to protect against. These crypto worms, like SamSam, and this latest one, Redis one of mine, is using, again, an NSA-grade exploit to install crypto coin miners. Everybody mine with cryptocurrencies or own cryptocurrencies? You don't have to raise your hand. But what the bad guys have realized is they now rob banks. They rob banks because banks have the money. Well, same thing. Cryptocurrencies have skyrocketed, so you've seen botnets that used to do DDoS attacks being repurposed to do crypto mining attacks instead, right? So this is a big threat because it harms resources, and if it's not mining, then it's going to be something like ransoming your entire organization, encrypting all your hard drives and holding you for ransom, right? Okay. Your classic targeted attacker we've been talking about for 20 years, and also your APT. So what is really interesting, and I'll say that in this crowd, I don't really share it in a lot of crowds, but of one of the NSA tools that was leaked is it's called territorial dispute. That's a 2-word name for a tool that was stolen from the NSA or leaked by the NSA, right? By someone from the NSA. And that tool literally is designed to be run on a system and to evaluate what other APTs have been on that system. Okay? Out of a group of about 50 of those possible APTs, it looks for indicators that says, oh, I'm an NSA guy, I want to say what bad guys might be on this before I do my thing as an NSA field agent, right? And so you hit the go button and it says, okay, we're aware of these 2 campaigns, one of them is Chinese. Do you want to proceed or not? That's kind of the operational context for this tool. Well, what we've learned from this tool, and what we heard this morning in the first talk at the IBM speaker, if you're in the big room, is the same thing, that the APT campaigns, from this study we've learned that they've been around for years prior to us understanding that they're here. So our systems, if they're going to target us, they've probably already been in our systems for a number of years, not months, but years, okay? So how do you protect against an APT years before it's going to target you? That's the question of the day. That's what we intend to answer with artificial intelligence, okay? So yeah, there's commonalities that all these have. I think I'll skip that for this point, but let's just say one thing really interesting. The gold word there is called inception. That's the point at which a file, an executable, comes into existence in the world. It's compiled. It now has a hash and it's a file, right? So at some point, call it today, right now, some bad guy creates a file and now it exists in the world. And after that file is used to attack somebody, what usually happens is they say, oh, I got ransomed or I got crypto, I'm going to send this into my antivirus vendor, and they're going to analyze it and create a signature for the file that now exists. Does that make sense? This is how security has worked for 30 years. You need a patient 0, you need a signature that comes after patient 0, and then that signature gets folded back in to defend everybody else that gets the benefit off the back of the sacrificial lamb that was the patient 0. Okay? So at Cylance, what we've done here, and what a lot of people are trying to do in other areas of cybersecurity, is say, no, I'm going to predict what that file is. And I'm going to predict it with so much confidence that I'm going to allow the machine to make an autonomous decision to say, no, you can't even run. Yes, nobody on the earth has ever seen you before or your hash, but I know what good software is from bad. I understand good and bad software at its core. Okay? That's what we're able to do. And we're not only able to do that, we collectively, I mean, we being human race for the first time, we being defenders of the good free world, are finally able to predict bad files. Okay? All these payloads are predictable, it's what I just said. And here's the interesting thing. Just like with Spectre, WannaCry, NotPetya, all the campaigns you've seen in 2017 and coming through now, they're all evolving in unexpected ways, weird ways. New vulnerabilities and exploits you never would have conceived of as a human in a million years. But they all have payloads that are predictable. And that is the key takeaway of everything I just said. Now, I told you I was supported the DoD for a period of time, right? One of these times I found myself in a room with a very upset admiral. Has anybody ever briefed an admiral before? Okay, in the back, anybody else? It is one of the scariest things you could ever do in your career. I do not advise it. It's an easy career-ending moment, all those things. But what had happened was the Iranians had found their way into a large enterprise, okay, of the navies. And at the time, the Iranians were not exactly considered a sophisticated threat. They were a real threat, but not like China or Russia, right? So this admiral was asking a really good question. How is it that I spend hundreds of millions of dollars on my security stack and the least sophisticated threat has found its way in and gotten credentials and is doing bad things? And my boss looked at me and I was sweating and I literally grabbed a piece of chalk, a chalkboard, not even a whiteboard. And I went up and I drew this slide and I made it up in real time. Nothing makes you creative like stress and pressure, right? So I said, sir, Admiral, sir, if time were a spear moving from left to right, back to time. And sir, if you were to look at your watch right now and you think back to that enterprise and those boundaries and all that layered defense we have, there's only two kinds of threats that are in your environment. There's the known threats and the unknown threats. And everything we've spent money on in the last 20 years has been this side. I'm going to block this on purpose. You can't see it, right? On this side is what we talk about and do. And this is the business of security. This is a 20-year-old problem we have actually solved pretty well. We actually have really good firewalls, really good proxies and IDS to find what? To find known threats. Threats that have signatures and threats that have heuristics and behavior that we understand to be bad. Okay? But sir, what has gotten us and what bit us in the butt, if you will, is this tip of the spear. That is what's happening at any given time you look at your watch. You have unknown threats that do not have those signatures, do not have heuristics we understand, do not use callback methods to the mothership, if you will, that we've understood to be bad. We didn't have all this in whatever it was, 2011 or 12, right? We didn't have that. But we have had this in the last, whatever, 5 to 10 years, depending on which one you're looking at. The ability to blow up a piece of malware, to watch what it does in a virtual environment that's safe, to know that it's bad based on what it did to that operating system, right? We've used behavior, we've used callback detection, we use big data, we call it anomalytics. That's not even a real word, by the way, but this industry has found a way to use the word, okay? And obviously cyber threat intelligence. So what Cylance has done, though, and what I didn't have to tell the Admiral, the tool we did not have in 2012 was quite simply math. It was data science. We couldn't approach this problem with data science and say, how do I get ahead of the entire spear altogether? How do I live out in this cushion of air in front of the tip of the spear and be able to proactively block and predict and prevent anything that might try to detonate in my environment? Is it even possible? Well, nobody would have thought that putting on the brakes autonomously in a Tesla was possible 10 years ago. Or that Netflix would know what you want to watch better than you know what you want to watch it yourself, right? So it actually is very possible. But in the past, time has been on the side of the attacker. Now it's finally restored to us as defenders, okay? So when I came to Cylance from FireEye Mandiant, I did not believe in anything I've just told you right now, and I certainly was a huge skeptic of the entire phenomenon I'm describing with artificial intelligence, okay? I did not believe it, so I did some own research for myself. And I was actually at Black Hat in 2016 on August 7th or whatever it was, and somebody said, oh my gosh, Symantec, one of our competitors at the time, came out with this massive report, along with Kaspersky, about Sauron. Sauron, or Strider, REMSEC. One of the most advanced APTs mankind had ever seen. It used binary large objects to hide in stealth. It used a Lua programming language to avoid YAR detection rules. It was amazing. And this report came out literally on August 7th, I think it was, that I put that, yeah, August 2016. And on the back of all these reports that come out about these APTs, you see at the end of those reports something called IOCs, indicators of compromise. And those are things like file hashes for the files that were used by the bad guys. Make sense? So we took those hashes, these are literally they, okay? And we ran them against. And I made my engineer do this, and he didn't know why I was asking him to do this because it didn't have any context. I wanted to kind of blindside him on purpose. Can you run those hashes and get those files rather, and run those files against an old math model, again, back to math, from January of 2015, 18 months before the rest of the human race knew about this advanced APT being present. And he ran it, and we got every single one of them, okay? So to this day, if you go into those, the REMSEC report from Symantec and you run those hashes, we predicted and would have prevented them from ever executing 18 months prior. That's the first time mankind has ever been able to do anything like this in the cyberspace. This continues to blow my mind. I don't think I could overstate it enough how crazy that is. That a product that is not connected to the internet, that does not need cloud, does not have any signatures at all, does not need any behavior, reputation, attribution, all the buzzwords of the industry today, the stuff that humans care about, the AI doesn't care about. It knows good software from bad better than we ever will, even as seasoned experts that have been doing this 3 decades. I did another one, and they mentioned Shamoon too in this morning's talk. And the long story short there is that this was a 3-part campaign. Actually, it had a credential stealing campaign called Greenberg, and that campaign went out, stole the credentials. The bad guys took the credentials and rolled them into the malware that became Shamoon Wave 1, Wave 2, and Wave 3 after that. And so what I did is I grabbed the hashes, the colors represent to those campaigns. I grabbed them all from the reports, and I ran them against, this is Palo Alto Unit 42, a great research company. I ran them against, and literally we were 483 days or 523 days in front of those campaigns. So we could have prevented that massive incident that you heard about there if that company had been running a predictive AI that's looking for these kind of models. Does that make sense? That's incredible. Why is it incredible? I mean, so I did more research, and this is what I came up with, and these are all the months, the number of months that were in front of those particular campaigns I happened to research to because I grabbed those binaries and did it. And the weird thing about AI is that arrow in front of the tip of the spear actually gets better and longer as time goes on. So now we're not 18 months in front, or 19 months in front of WannaCry. You know, now we're 21 months. So, yeah, so this is what basically data science has given the human race for the first time ever. And I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but these are massive wins for the human race because, again, these algorithms are math. What do CPU processors do really well? Math, right? They don't do heuristics very well. They don't do signature lookups well. It turns out they love running an algorithm and making a binary decision in 50 milliseconds as to whether or not a file gets stolen or not. They love doing that all day long. So you have 1% CPU instead of 10 or 12 or 14% CPU of your old antivirus, right? You don't need any connection. You run this model, you don't do anything, you don't manage it. Somebody comes up with a thumb drive 18 months later that has malware on it and tries to run it. No signatures have ever been made. It still stops it. So again, predictive AI has come a long way. This one just came out. It's another example. This is the crypto jacking worm that goes through everybody's environment and literally turns their entire server environments into crypto mining software. And the 3 hashes that just came out the other day, I just did this on the plane too, we stopped as well. So this is an interesting story. Does anybody know anybody who was impacted by WannaCry? Yeah, sure, right? Anybody else? Or read about WannaCry when it was hitting? Do you remember seeing like the news reports? It was like spreading everywhere, and Australia was kind of last, and it was weird that it was, but it was. This story is a story of the fact that on the bottom you'll see what humans could have never predicted, which is the evolution of how WannaCry came to be as a threat. You know, the NSA dumped, the shadow brokers have dumped these tools. The fact that WannaCry starts propagating on May 12th, just one month after the dump. Like in 1 month, they weaponized this to the world's biggest worm. And then you have your signature updates, and everybody's protected by May 15th, right? This is after the patches came out, because nobody actually patched, unfortunately. We learned that. Always patch. Okay, don't use it anymore. We used an old model from November 2015, and we stopped all of the WannaCry payloads that ever came out since day 1, before day 0. Okay? Why is that important? Because when a worm hits Earth and tens of thousands of people have billions of dollars of damage, and disruption is to critical infrastructure, to trains, to hospitals, to shipping containers, to FedEx, to everybody else that was impacted by WannaCry to the tune of many billions of dollars worldwide, all could have been prevented if the human race, and eventually we'll get here, but all could have been prevented with just one single algorithm that takes up 50 megabytes and sits in RAM. It's really weird, okay? Now, Specter Meltdown is another worm that's going to come out, probably. We'll see. But this is the evolution of that. It's a really weird evolution where Intel Corporation, the manufacturer of the chip, knew about the vulnerability and told some Chinese companies before they even told the US government. Nobody's trying to be malicious there. It's not weird. It's just the fact that their biggest customers were told first and privately. And some of their biggest customers have to be Chinese, whatever. But what I'm saying is, like, the evolution of how a weird worm comes to be is not predictable. There's a lot of weird stuff that happened with this. The fact that this same vulnerability that's been in our computers 25 years was discovered by 4 different researchers, groups in 4 different continents at the same time, that's called a bug collision. It doesn't happen very often, but what it tells you is that the research university and academia have gotten so good at finding hardware vulnerabilities in the last literally like 6 months, not 6 years, 6 months, that they're going to continue to uncover many more. That the average PhD now has better knowledge and tools and skills and methodology than entire generations of hackers before them. So vulnerabilities are going to come out left and right. This is why you see academia pushing the lead to figure out what's going to happen with Spectre. When that payload hits and that worm hits, why not be protected? That's the whole point of that. Does anybody here work with what I call cyber threat intelligence? Working with IOCs or MSISACs to ingest, let's say, domains and IP addresses or whatever? That's what we call tactical OSINT, or atomic IOCs, right? Static things like IP addresses and domains. And to do that, you ingest something from an ISAC, maybe you update your bro center, right? That's how you operationalize that. By the time you take that operation, all of that information is expired. And anybody who's lived through that pain knows that firsthand. It is constantly chasing a ghost problem. It's also very human intensive. And what do we have least of all in this world? We have least of all human assets to help us out. It's noisy, it has a fast expiration that we talked about, it's hard to operationalize, it's very reactive. What we're trying to do lately is get to this proactive stance where we can say, oh, I'm going to start hunting for these IOCs proactively. I'm not going to wait for anything else. I'm going to ingest those and go hunt on my own and try to find bad stuff. And this is being done via automation with SIM integration like Splunk. You can hunt 1,000 different ways. Elk is a great way to hunt these days. But it's not good enough, okay? And it's very painful. So what we draw now is a new set of axes. And this is a set of axes where we left off with hunting. Now we want to get to autonomous predictive prevention where we don't need humans, okay? Where we have being proactive and we're doing big data stuff across large sets of data, let's get to AI. Let's actually allow the machines to make autonomous decisions with high confidence, okay? Let's use the predictive AI to do one thing more than all, which is be wise. Because we have the need to solve many problems, and if we're always inundated with this noisy business of security, we'll never actually find the insider threat. And that's what we should be hunting for 24/7 if we actually were able to unload all the noise. I have a slide that depicts that as well. But so it's not just malware, okay? Cylance is an AI company. There's a lot of AI companies. You go to RSA, there's 1,700 vendors. I guarantee you at least half of them are using machine learning in some form or another. Machine learning is very powerful. We're finally catching on to that as a human race. Cybersecurity industry is a little slow in doing that. But you know, this is an example of if once you have data science on your side, you can solve for problems that you can never solve for as humans. This is just a depiction of what happens when somebody walks in with an AI toolkit, like a Swiss Army knife, of knowing how to use machine learning to solve a problem. In this case, the problem is walking into a large environment of over 10,000 users and saying which accounts are compromised, because I've just had an incident, maybe my Active Directory's been compromised, but I don't know which accounts are compromised. That is one of the hardest things to do. I run consulting for global consulting for Cylance, in particular for larger strategic accounts. And we do thousands of compromise assessments, hundreds of IRs per year. And one of the hardest things always to do is to find user accounts that are compromised, right? Because it's an authorized transaction with an account that already exists, doing something likely that it's even supposed to be able to do. That doesn't even look like bad, right? So to find bad, you need even more context. And that's where you kind of trust your gut as an analyst and use other types of context to find which accounts are compromised. So this AI literally is a brilliant idea, and as a former Marine came up with this, okay, came out of the field using machine learning actually in operations in the field, and said, how do I solve for this? Well, he collects over 100 different events off of all the endpoints using a native operating system script. It runs once, goes away, and all these events go back to a backend, and he correlates them, and then he applies an AI that he built literally to solve for this. And what's really crazy is he's got to the 89th% level of efficacy. So walking into this organization, running these scripts once, a day later after doing that and crunching this, which takes a little while to crunch through, he literally finds with high confidence which accounts are compromised. And what's weird is the more data, the better and easier it is for the AI to do. That's not the case for human IR respondents. It's really hard to scale a human expert with gut instinct and contextual awareness and experience and wisdom to large environments. But the AI is like, give me more. This is a revolution that's happening in the world right now. This is not just cybersecurity. It has everything to do with stocks. It has everything to do with medicine, everything around us, autonomous vehicles and drones and everything else. The AI is literally, there's miniature singularities happening all around us. And this is a visual what it looks like. Basically, you take half the data and you test for it and you get your AI up to a high confidence level. And then you run against a test set, which is what you predicted to be the case, and you get an overlay. Yellow is on top of light blue, and you can't see the light blue except for the little tips in each area, right? So what it's showing you is this is what 99% prediction efficacy looks like on a graph. And then where you see the little purple spikes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, those purple lines on the bottom there are actually where there's anomaly sufficient enough to say, you know what, that's an event that corresponds to a compromised user account with a high degree of confidence. And now you're actually hunting with You're not going down rabbit holes. You're hunting only for the compromised accounts you know are compromised. You're just validating them at that point. Anyway, short version, this saves 2.5 to 3 months of effort for a large IR, a massive compromise. A guy wrote it in 2 weeks, over the weekends, right? One of our consultants. He's not even one of our data scientists. He's one of our consultants in the field. So this is what the math looks like. If anybody, is anybody a math person here? Oh, good. We can skip the slide. It's awesome, crazy stuff that does cool things. Next. So I'm going to start wrapping this up and talk about the impact that AI can have on your organization. Okay. At the end of the day, do you remember the kill chain that went left to right? Does everyone remember the steps an attacker takes to get to compromise you? Well, this one in red over there is basically where execution was. That's that place, that pivotal moment where the enemy actually owns you, if that makes sense. And then this is where credentials happen, where they escalate. And once an attacker has your credentials, the cat's out of the bag, the genie's out of the bottle, but you don't get it back in. Bad things are going to happen no matter what you do. Okay? So the goal is to stop things pre-execution. And what this slide depicts is that's the amount of effort that you can take as a security defender to protect pre-execution normally. It's like one line. But if once it detonates, those other lines, it represents the bulk load of the work that it is to be a Ciso or an analyst or anybody in this entire industry. This is where all the pain is. This is where 1,700 vendors are lined up for NSA for. This is the entire EDR phenomenon. This is your SIM phenomenon. This is your C2 firewalling, your proxies. Everything lives right here. It's all designed to detect what happens after execution. Okay? It's a lot of work, and it's also a lot of risk to the organization. And if to get your credentials, here's the funny thing. Your risk is pretty high. It's pretty red. There's actually not a lot you can do. There's less you can do after here than there is you can do before. Okay? So again, this is where we live. This is where pain lives. Now, I'm going to draw the same kill chain and describe the world with the predictive AI. Okay, this is the same kill chain moving left to right, but we're applying AI at two critical junctures, the malware execution and also the compromise. Okay? So if we've predicted all those bad campaigns by all those number of months, they're not going to execute, right? Now, we've predicted this to the 99th percentile, which means very few gets through, okay? Now, the goal is, of all AI is to superhumanize us, okay? I have another talk I give called transhackerism, which is a call to arms for the hacking community to understand AI and learn how to break AI as well and how to leverage AI. Because we're trying to get superhuman with AI because we have to. Why? Because we don't have enough people to do the heavy lifting, okay? So we need AI desperately. It's our only hope in Star Wars terminology. So these numbers and these squares, I'll just fly through them. But so how do you actually do this? I mean, it's hard work. Math is hard. I'm not a math guy, but I can say it's hard. You have to look at billions of files. You spin up 40,000 cores in Microsoft, AWS rather. You literally need data from 10 million endpoints, and you're looking at 300 million features of every file. Now, if you look at the number of extractable features and permutations of those features on one file, do you know what the number is? The total number of features on a file? Try to guess. Anybody guess? I want two guesses, a first person and a second person. You're first. 25. No, 25. Okay, good. Anybody else? Okay. And again, this is through the lens of math, so you're totally forgiven for saying 25. Because honestly, here's what's weird. Most humans, when they do malware analysis, there's about 300 to maybe 1,000 features that are human knowable to understand that a file is malware. So when a malware analyst is doing their thing and saying, is this file good or bad? I'm analyzing it as an analyst. Looking at like 300 things mostly, right? And a lot of people have figured out using machine learning to automate those human knowable analysis functions. But math looks at a file and it's like, I think I have the number. Yeah, 4.8 times 10 to the 344th power. That is massive. That, if you put that in your calculator, it'll literally come back and say the word infinity. It will spell it out in English for you. That's actually why our backend database is called Infinity, an inside joke. It's massive. So we're only looking, the AI, I should say, I say we, I mean the AI. The AI model is only looking at 300 million of those features. But isn't 300 million way more than the 300 that we humans have been doing for 30 years? Right? And not only that, it's looking at combinations of features and absences of features, really weird permutations of features. It's looking at features for which there's no human language or human knowable intelligence to describe. That's why AI has surpassed humankind in narrow fields such as this one, and such as things like autonomous braking, etc. Okay? So all that gets reduced down to, because you can't spin up 40,000 cores on your laptop. It would melt, right? It would be hotter than the core of the sun. So what we've done instead is we use algorithmic science to shrink that model down into an algorithm that runs in 50 megs of space. The magic of what data scientists accomplish is actually the ability to shrink it down. That's actually where the magic happens. That's the hard part. Anyway, so the point is we do the work so you don't have to do it, so that, back to our analogy here, if you're stopping 99%, remember this was filled with bars of work you have to do and risk for the industry. Well, now it's not. And same with credentials, we have AI to solve for that. So the thing is, all those pain points have now turned into joy points. And I'm not overstating that. We have clients that literally write us thank you letters or whatever that say, this is the first time I'm able to go home on a Friday and not have to worry about the latest ransomware work, right? You know, in ICS environments, translates to safety really strongly. When I say positive ROI, you should never believe something that says positive ROI in the context of a security product, unless you're talking about a predictive AI. Okay, we get literally 251%, third-party study of a large county on the East Coast, literally 251% positive ROI on a security investment. It's weird, right? So all these things are things that AI in general can do for you. Your help desk tickets go down, et cetera. I'm trying to make it kind of brass tacks real. Because the world we're heading in towards is crazy. And while certain companies like us and a few others have solved for malware and other aspects of cybersecurity, there's a lot more to solve for. That's a short list of 9 areas that we're also solving for with math on another product line called Optics, right? How do I understand through the lens of math when an attacker is moving laterally in your organization or escalating privileges or living off the land with PowerShell, or who is an insider, et cetera. So does that make sense? You know, I think I'm probably towards the end, but yeah. So this is a time-based problem. The goal is to literally be left of bang in the truest sense of the word, not an analogy, to be able to predict and stop anything from executing that is bad before that thing even comes into existence, before the bad guys even conceive of the ransomware campaign. We're 18 months in front of the entire campaign. Before they set up their fog network and the Bitcoin payment system and all the stuff the bad guys are doing, we're literally 18 months for that. And that's all provable. And it needs to be provable. Otherwise, you shouldn't trust it and shouldn't do it. It's provable by being able to run it against an old model. Okay, so we can understand as humans that this is crazy times we're living in. So there's bad news to this story too. Everything I described here is pretty much the good news stuff, the defender side. The bad guys are automating everything as well. And they're actually doing it at a faster clip than we are on the defending side. So I'd love to entertain questions and talk to anybody afterwards too. But what questions do we have first? Yes. Oh, awesome. Yeah, so there is tuning, and I'll tell you why. When you run this in your environment, say you have 1,000 laptops, right, whatever, it's going to look at every file in the system, which means every file in your whole Windows gold disk, if you will, is going to be analyzed for being good or bad, and with a weighted score and a classification. So that gives you, as an organization, visibility into your network, your laptop stack that you've never had before. And it kind of is it's a fire hose at first. So we have a process called Threat Zero, which helps the organization understand and ingest that and make good. So it's an initial tuning phase, and then it's done. The thing is, you mentioned the word whitelist, which is really interesting. So it's a predictive AI. It predicts 3 years from now what is going to be a good or bad file. So instead of using a whitelisting technology like one that everybody knows, like Bit9, let the AI dynamically and get better at understanding good software better than you ever will. Don't use whitelisting technology anymore, because that's a dangerous technology. It's extremely heavy and intensive for the organization. Philosophically, idealistically, it's a great technology. You're only letting good stuff run. But the problem is bad guys hide in good stuff. And if you're relying on things like whether or not a file is signed, or whether it's the latest version of a trusted distribution otherwise to whitelist, which you do as humans because you're under pressure to get stuff done and you make decisions, right? That whitelist gets dirty over time. A lot of times we go to organizations like large, like what we call super majors, hundreds of thousands of endpoints, and we'll interrogate their whitelist with AI, and we'll find a tremendous percentage of malicious files that have been hiding in that whitelist for years. So whitelist is an interesting concept, but you're better off letting the AI predict what the whitelist universe looks like of good software and trying to manage to it.
I've thought about, I don't know if everybody's next question, we thought about using it for the Garcia network because of the fact that when we do the signature file updates, you don't have to go out to the internet for that. But as I'm looking at Gartner reports on endpoint protection, I typically see some ending and McAfee up at the top of the heap.
For ISIS?
And, well, yeah, in general. And
Yeah.
that's where my hesitation is going with Cylance. I would expect if it's as good as you're saying what I've heard,
Yeah.
it should be a bit.
Yeah, so there's two parts to the answer. One has to do just with ICS, and the other one's a more broader point. The ICS point is to end up on like a PLC controller, a Windows box, you have to usually work with a vendor to get authorized to be on the approved list. And usually that's only just one McAfee vendor, and a lot of times it's just McAfee. And that's been our traditional relationship. We actually pitched this whole thing, basically this whole deck, everything I just did about all the predictive AI. We pitched it to an OEM that makes most of the ICS hardware in certain environments in oil and gas. Right? We walked in there. To their CTO, very important person. And he listened to the whole thing. At the end, he said, you know what, I heard everything you said. It's kind of cool stuff. I'm not a math guy. It's whatever. Even if it's sexy, even if it works, it's cool. But what you did is you didn't just solve the malware problem. You actually solved my antivirus problem. Because in ICS environments, you have your operators that are also wearing two hats. They have to keep up an operating system, antivirus up to date. They have to allow that connection, break their Purdue model, right, the air gaps, to do that, or thumb drive it, and they don't do it. So what happens is the signatures are always stale. They're not getting done. Or if they do it, guess what they're doing? Taking time away from safety and uptime. And so it's always a trade-off in ICS environments, right? So his problem is like, I don't care if you guys work or not. I care the fact that if you're on my box as an OEM, which now we're working with, my customers downstream of me that use my products no longer have to manage the AV problem. We see it in the enterprise space as well. When we first went to market in 2014, 2015, to your broader point, a lot of people chose to coexist with the current antivirus before they rolled all the way over. This came up 2 weeks ago. A salesperson said, I have a customer that's fairly large, 10,000 endpoints, wants to know, he doesn't believe that people are cutting fully over. Because actually he called Gartner. Gartner told him, most people that use Cylance are coexisting. So it's not a true statement. It was a true statement in 2014, 2015. So literally I sent a poll to our whole sales team. I said, give me your accounts that are fully cut over. We got to 1,000 and 1,300,000 endpoints in total across 20 clients. Each client has an average of 55,000 seats. And we only 300,000 of them were still coexisting. So about 1 million of them had cut over fully. And so these days, it really depends on the organization, the culture. A lot of people coexist with us because they already own a 3-year contract on McAfee and Symantec or whatever. And so they'll coexist because they're already paying for it, right? They already bought it. And then they'll actually take, you know why they end up taking it off? Because help tickets went down, and they're coming up on technology refresh for the laptop itself. And we buy them another 6 to 9 months of tech refresh cycle because we will go from 14% CPU down to 1%. So they do it for the resource reasons. That's what they'll cut over, and after they have confidence in the efficacy. That was a good question. What else? What about other broader AI questions? You can tell I love this stuff. It kind of still freaks me out. Every time I brief it, I still almost don't believe what I'm saying, you know what I mean? Because it's just a weird era we live in. Anybody else give me an example of a predictive AI in their life that you know of? I'll give you a funny one that'll freak you out too. You go to a shopping mall, like a nice one, and there's these kiosks that used to be like the directory to tell you where to go for shops. Well, there's cameras on those now. And as you walk up as a human being, it's doing facial rec. And if it's ever seen you before and knows where you go and it knows your spending habits, of course, in the stores, it will literally highlight for use just in stores. If you're wearing any QR codes or any city code, like a baseball hat with a Los Angeles Angels or whatever, it literally ingests all that contextual information about everything it can using NLP, image recognition, etc. And so those things become massive marketing machines. And as we go forward, what's going to happen is as you're walking down the hall, it's already going to know you I like racing cars or whatever. And so when I walk by Toomey, it's going to highlight the fact that there's a wallet on sale that says Porsche on it or something. Off the top example. But so that's the world we're heading into. All that's predictive AI. It's literally predicting what your habits are and everything else based on large trends. So there's tons of other weird ones. Yeah.
I think one thing we're crossing the line on is Amazon.
Amazon shopping.
They're going to buy an S, you want to buy.
Freaks you out, right?
A little bit. But the more you use, the more accurate it is.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I recently freaked out because somebody tried to access one of my Gmail accounts. I have like 15 of those things, right? And so every once in a while this happens, and it says, somebody's using this my backup email account, and here's the code. Like, okay, password restart. I go through my homework thing, right? So when I did that, I was realizing through all the privacy settings that I've been letting Gmail on a few of those accounts log everything. And so all the privacy settings, I went through and did a privacy audit of myself. I turned off all that stuff. The bad news is, now when I use my Google Maps, all my favorite restaurants and everything I've been tracking for the last 5 years are gone. I didn't realize that it was going to go to Maps. So it's a... Yeah, and AI is truly a double-edged sword. I mean, there's entire talks that you give that... let's put it this way. I've been going to DEF CON since 2001, so for about 25 years, whatever. No, before that, 97. DEF CON 5. And this is a hacker convention in Vegas, right? Most of us know about it, right? And there's a certain party called Caesar's Challenge, where if you get in, you solve the crypto puzzle, you get into this challenge. And the challenge is usually around how to solve a world problem with being hackers. And the year before last was one about AI. How do you break AI? How do you bring it down? Have we gotten to the point where AI is going to be so ubiquitous that you can't put the genie back in the bottle? And we absolutely have, by the way. Like, there's no going back. It's impossible. The human race couldn't do it if it wanted to. If everything we tried to do right now, we wanted to do it, we could do it. If we break too much, we die, we starve. All of our food, all of our transport, all of our shipping, all of our aircraft, every single thing that you do and touches a human being is already being fully leveraged with AI. Okay, not all of them are predictive AIs or whatever, but it's all AI. So, but that whole thing, the whole hacking conference, the whole party was all about, is there a way to break AI? Do we want to break AI? If we did, how would we do it? So yeah, for right now, we need it more than anything. The human race is suffering. In cybersecurity, 3.5 million jobs unfilled, 100% unemployment.
I like the idea of can we use AI to break malaria.
Nice. Yes. Yeah.
Which AI technology is better than itself?
Yeah. Awesome example. You made me think. So the image recognition thing. Somebody's printing T-shirts now. An artist, right? It's a warped, so there's a picture of a cat, right? It's a cat. And if you look at this cat, the AI thinks it's guacamole. Already funny, right? It's a picture of a cat. Now, here's the weird thing. That cat image to us looks just like a cat. Like, you don't know it's modified. But it's subtly modified at a pixel level to fake AIs out, to think it's guacamole. But if you take the same image and you literally rotate it like 17 degrees, so the cat's going like this, it knows it's a cat immediately. Because most of the images it's trained on have had a tilted image of a cat. And that one dynamic of catdom brings it back to know it's a cat versus guacamole. And so there's also an artist, I kind of went on a tangent, but there's another artist that has T-shirts that you wear that fake out all this stuff I was talking about when you go out to the mall. It can't tell what you are. It thinks that you're like some piece of hardware. A toaster or something. T-shirt tells you you're a toaster.
I've heard of shirts that have like code on them.
Yeah, QR code.
AI run code.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's what is it? QR dropping or something? There's a name for it now. Yeah. So you got to be careful with those QR codes. Just public service announcement. Never use one on your phone to take a picture of a fly or anything else that comes your way. Doesn't matter how legit it looks or who's doing it. Like those QR codes can be easy because they'll usually send your browser somewhere. And it usually goes to that site, and as it's loading, you're already on, right? So if you have an Android especially, but even iOS and Safari is vulnerable to a lot of mobile sites. So yeah, stay away from the QR codes. They're horrible. Other questions? Who? Yeah. Oh, are there QR codes everywhere?
Sounds available on mobile devices?
Yes and no. Not publicly, not for you. we do have a few clients that we're working with on certain platforms. So it'll run on a Raspberry Pi 1st Gen. It's so lightweight that it'll run on pretty much anything. This is also why we're getting into the ICS space with vendors as well. There's other embedded systems that are interesting, like vehicles and drones and stuff, where it's a perfect application, right? So not yet. We do have a home user edition, though, that now our clients can use, too, so all their users at home can also leverage the protection. Is anybody else's mind blown? Does anybody not I wrote an honest answer. Does anybody not believe the point about predicting malware before it even exists? Does anybody not believe it? Okay, good. That's an accurate statement. It's a complete true statement. I asked one of our data scientists, Matt Wolf, who spent like 9 years at NSA doing nothing but adversarial machine learning stuff. I asked him at RSA one year, when I finally got to meet him in person, I said, what's our biggest danger? Where are we vulnerable? Where's our weak spot, right? Because every technology has one. And he goes, well, I'll tell you one thing, it's not the AI. And I said, well, why? He goes, well, you're not a math guy, are you? I was like, no. He's like, well, the types of AIs we're using, the combination of stuff we're doing is so complex that to beat it, you can't beat it versus the very well-published traditional adversarial machine learning mechanisms. So you can't just tell the cat that it's guacamole by messing with pixels, because it's not just the feature size, but also the types of AI we're doing, supervised, unsupervised, different types of approaches to the AI to keep it honest. And then we're also actively building centroids, which are around certain classifications of malware that come into existence. And those centroids, they continuously get better after they're built. So that's his one man's opinion. Smarter than I am, certainly a better math guy than I am. But to your point, absolutely, there's definitely going to be a way to break all of the AIs out there. And in fact, if we have one need as an industry, it's probably going to be in the next 5 years, entire security consulting practices that are built just around how to protect and protect AIs. And especially where AI intersects with blockchain, because those two is going to be a really weird world pretty soon. Yeah. Good stuff, man. Yeah. Okay, well, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I don't know how we're doing on time, but I really enjoyed this today. I hope you guys did too. And I'd love to talk to you. I'll be at the booth later.